Hello, fellow mech warriors. Mage Leader here, and it's been a little while since I made one of these videos, and well, there's a reason for that. Honestly, I don't really enjoy making these particular sorts of videos. I'm sure this may come as a surprise to some who probably take a look at me and my content and what I do on other platforms and assume that I enjoy being angry all the time and just generally ranting and raving and yelling at the clouds, but that's not really the case. I prefer to make videos about things that I enjoy, things that I'm passionate about. But these days, it's getting a lot harder to do that. Because there are a lot of things that I'm passionate about, a lot of things that I want to make content on, but the current state of these particular things are, well, pretty crappy. So one of the things I would like to talk about is like TTRPGs, like Dungeons & Dragons. Well, the current state of Dungeons & Dragons is absolutely crap. My big thing is Battletech, but I've had to more or less relegate myself to just sticking with older eras because the current state of Battletech is pretty freaking bad. I would absolutely love to talk about video games on this channel. I've been a gamer my whole life, but one, I'm not very good at video games, and two, the current state of video games is pretty freaking crappy. And one of the things that I've always been really passionate about, that I've wanted to talk about, is The Lord of the Rings. So, me and Lord of the Rings go back quite a ways. When I was a kid, I grew up reading a lot of books. My kind of go-to series was Redwall. I read the Chronicles of Narnia. I still love the Chronicles of Narnia. And then when I started to get a little bit older, I went into Lord of the Rings. I'd already read The Hobbit as a kid, and I loved The Hobbit. I still do. But Lord of the Rings was kind of this special, my first kind of gateway into worlds with lore. And I didn't get into it a ton when I was a kid, but I understood the basics of it. The movies were coming out when I was still fairly young, and I just kind of fell in love with the world of Middle-earth like I know so many other people did. And I always wanted, even before I started this channel, I wanted to do something and talk with people about how much I loved it and why. And I kind of always planned to. I kind of made the mistake of locking myself into Battletech a little bit too hard. I'll be honest, videos that aren't Battletech related don't tend to do very well. They don't get a lot of views because I'm a Battletech guy. That's kind of what people associate my channel with. And I've been trying to branch out for a little bit, and I'm still going to. I have lots of other things that I want to make videos on. This is one of those things. So I plan to start doing it around sometime last year. And Rings of Power came out. Now, Rings of Power was an absolute disaster. I thought about maybe watching some of it and maybe doing a sort of post-mortem breakdown of the show, but honestly, I made it like 3 episodes in and I was so incredibly bored just by how utterly bland the story was. Like, it wasn't even bad to the point of being enjoyable to watch for that reason. It was just boring as sin. If you follow my community tab, you probably saw that sort of thing going down, and long story short, I decided against covering Rings of Power, because one, I knew it wouldn't perform very well anyway, and two, it just wasn't worth the effort. I didn't care enough about it to actually waste the time making videos on something that I couldn't even bring myself to watch, not because it was so horrible and atrocious and an affront to Tolkien, though it was, but simply because it just was so soul-crushingly boring to try and sit through. And so I kind of put my plans to talk about Lord of the Rings stuff on the back burner. I'd love to delve into Lord of the Rings lore at some point on this channel, and I still kind of plan to do that at some point, if I can ever break out of the Battletech mold that I've kind of put myself in. But again, the thing that holds me back, and aside from just, I'm the Battletech guy and people want me to talk about Battletech and don't really care when I talk about other things, apart from that, the thing that's really held me back is just that Lord of the Rings is in a really annoying spot right now, and that has gotten just a little bit worse recently. as I'm sure many of you are aware, the world of Lord of the Rings was kind of safeguarded for many years after J.R.R. Tolkien's death by his son, Christopher Tolkien. And Christopher Tolkien is also responsible for finishing and publishing a lot of his father's kind of secondary notes on the world of Middle-earth. Part of the reason why we have so much lore is because of Christopher Tolkien. He died in January of 2020. He's been dead for about 3 years. And awfully conveniently, almost immediately after he was gone, we started seeing all these new Lord of the Rings licensed projects starting to pop up and changes being made in things that were already established. And it's just so funny to me that these are things that people have been pushing for years, but we can only start getting them now that the most ardent protector of Lord of the Rings is gone and out of the picture. Well, now that we've gotten him out of the way, we can actually start moving forward with these plans that we've been having for a long time. That's what it smacks of, because of how quickly these pop up. You know these have been in the works for a while, and these are things that Christopher Tolkien would never have approved of, and now suddenly they're coming out of the woodwork. And the most recent example of this is the recent partnership with Wizards of the Coast to bring us Lord of the Rings themed Magic the Gathering cards. And hoo boy, what a shitstorm this has been. I've followed this kind of since the beginning, and I'm not gonna lie, the shitstorm on Twitter was pretty friggin' hilarious to sit through, at least the first time. They released this card, which shows allegedly shows Aragorn and Arwen together, King Elessar and his queen. To which I say, where's Aragorn? Is he hiding behind his wife's boyfriend? Like, who the fuck is this guy? That's not Aragorn. It's not Aragorn at all. I've read the books. That's not even close to what he looks like. And then, as usual, you get the typical suspects coming out of the woodwork, people who have no interest in Lord of the Rings, almost every time, guaranteed. A lot of times they claim that they will. I doubt it in most cases. Maybe there's a few of them that do. I sincerely doubt it in most cases, because they clearly haven't put much into actually, reading the books or caring about what they have to say. But all these people come out, and what do? They want to defend the decision. They don't actually even want to do that. They don't want to defend this decision to do this ethnicity swap, I guess, for lack of a better term off the top of my head. They don't actually want to defend the decision. What they actually want to do is use it as a cudgel to beat at people that they don't like. It's a sort of gotcha moment. Haha, look at us, we're winning, you guys get fucked. That's what it amounts to on the internet. And so, as you'd expect, there's been a lot of people who actually bother to read the books, and people who know absolutely nothing about them, going back and forth as to what the actual correct way of portraying Aragorn in an adaptation would be. Now, this initial shitstorm, I kind of got into a little bit, but didn't really want to cover it extensively, because, well, it just wasn't the right time. I was working on another project. I had a backlog that I was going through. I wanted to actually get some more Battletech stuff done. But this is kind of in my wheelhouse. This is something that, it's not only Lord of the Rings, which is something that I'm passionate about, it's Wizards of the Coast, who make things that I'm also very passionate about from the tabletop gaming perspective, which I think encompasses a good chunk of my audience, and it may be something that people would be interested in me talking about. So I decided this time, when it comes up again, now that it's come up again rather, that I would just throw a little something together in the course of an afternoon when I happen to have a day off, and, well, I'll talk about it a little bit. I have many thoughts about these, shall we say, creative liberties that have been taken with the character of Elessar, or Aragorn, or Strider, depending on which name you know him by. And surprisingly enough, none of them actually have to do with racism. What they have to do with is anthropology, which is a very strange thing to talk about, because I'm not an anthropologist by any means, but someone who actually did know a thing or two about anthropology would happen to be J.R.R. Tolkien himself. What a lot of people know, and what some people might not, is that Tolkien was a very passionate individual when it came to languages. And part of studying language and how it spreads is studying anthropology. You need to understand people and culture in order to understand how languages develop and how they move from place to place. Tolkien was obsessed with language throughout his life. He was obsessed with other cultures, other peoples, and trying to bring their stories and mythologies into a sort of more accessible world that other people could enjoy as much as he did. He was working on the setting of Middle-earth throughout basically his entire adult life, and he put a lot of detail into it. It is a very granular setting. You can pick it apart to a ridiculous degree because there is just so much stuff there. And with one of his primary passions being the study of language, and by extension the study of people who use said languages, he actually put a lot of thought into the types of people that you would find in Middle-earth. And so it makes it very difficult to slip this sort of modern sensibility messaging into his world. So I'm going to, well, as briefly as I can, try and discuss what exactly is the issue here, in a way that hopefully some people can understand and not come to the snap judgment conclusion, though I know that a lot of people are probably going to do that anyway. I am going to kind of try to make the case as to why this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then once I've gone through all that, I'm going to kind of make some assumptions about what is actually going on here, and why Wizards of the Coast most likely doesn't actually give a shit about this. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys watching will already know a lot of this stuff. After all, it's the fans who are the most passionate about these things, but I think there may be some folks in the audience who might not understand what the big deal is, and so I'd like to kind of present what the big deal is. So let's just get right into it. So, the most common thing that I see being said online is, what's the big deal? It's just making things more inclusive. It's just having a bit more diversity in things in the Middle-earth setting. What's wrong with that? Well, to that my answer is, no it's not. It's not more inclusive, and it's not more diverse, and the reason for that is simply because, well, dark-skinned people are nothing new in Middle-earth, and I understand where the misconception could come from. When Peter Jackson made his trilogy of films about Lord of the Rings, which are excellent, I might add, one of the things that came about either because of casting constraints, or perhaps maybe a mistake, or it's a decision made out of some sort of budgetary concern, was the extras are almost all white people, and that includes for these guys. So for those who are unfamiliar, these are meant to be individuals from the nations of Hrun and Harad. Hrun lies to the east of Gondor, and Harad lies to the south, and Tolkien describes these people as being dark-skinned. In the movies, this doesn't really come across. We don't get a lot of close-up looks at these guys, but the most you might be able to say is they look vaguely Middle Eastern, but for the most part, you see white guys in costumes when you look at these dudes. So I could totally understand why someone might watch these movies and assume that everyone in Middle-earth is white, because, well, that's basically what the casting of this movie looks like. However, it's not accurate to what Tolkien actually wrote. The Haradrim and the Easterlings both are described by Tolkien as being dark-skinned. So this does exist in Middle-earth. The difference is that they come from a specific place. The kingdoms of Middle-earth are very different from the world in which we live in today. we're very used to our sort of modern Western societies, which are very multicultural. We have people from tons of different backgrounds. We have people with tons of different skin colors just kind of walking around, and that's normal for us. And the reason is because traveling between one place and another is relatively, at least in historical context, fairly safe and inexpensive to do. If I really wanted to, I could pack up just about all of my stuff and take myself off to Kenya, or to Germany, or to Russia even. I could just kind of go wherever. Middle-earth, however, particularly in the Third Age, is not a place that's very safe to travel in. You have marauding warbands of orcs and bandits all over the place, mostly because society and civilization as a whole is largely broken down. What a lot of people might not realize about Lord of the Rings is that it's basically a post-apocalyptic world. Everything that was good or powerful in the world has been dead for like 1,000 years or more. So traveling from one kingdom to another is a long, dangerous affair, and something that people don't do very often as a result. This means that you get a bunch of kingdoms of people who tend to stick very close together, and you don't really get melting pots of cultures and ethnicities. What you get are fairly homogenous groups of people. So, that means that if you're seeing someone who has this sort of skin tone as depicted by Wizards of the Coast, you're not seeing a Gondorian. What you're seeing is a Haradrim, most likely. Or at the very least, you're seeing someone who has Haradrim blood in them, something which is very uncommon in the setting, and particularly uncommon in the royal bloodline. So in effect, you haven't really made Middle-earth more diverse. There are dark-skinned people in Middle-earth, and you would be hard-pressed to even call them a minority. They would be a minority in Gondor, but not in Harad. They would be the majority there. They're not really a marginalized people group in the way that we think of them today. No, what you get, instead of making it more diverse, because they're already there, what you get is a whole can of worms being opened that now makes everyone wonder, okay, what the fuck was Arathorn up to? It calls into question Aragorn's entire royal lineage, because now he clearly has Haradrim in him, and that causes so many issues with the way the story works that it's gonna take me a minute to try and break this down. So, Aragorn is descended from a line of men known as the Dunedain. The Dunedain hail from Arnor. Tolkien gives us a very detailed description of what the Dunedain look like, and they're fairly uniform. They tend to have bright, fierce eyes and pale skin. This is outright specified more than once in the Lord of the Rings books, as well as the extended other books such as the Silmarillion and the Book of Unfinished Tales. You can find tons of descriptions of what these people look like, and, well, no surprise, pale skin comes up just about every time. Therefore, it's pretty safe to assume that basically all of Aragorn's ancestors would have looked, well, basically like your typical depictions of the heirs of Elendil. They would be white-skinned people of the Dunedain. Now, to give you an idea of exactly what's going on here, if you look at the map of Middle-earth and where it is labeled Eriador, that is where the Kingdom of Arnor used to be. These are also the primary stomping grounds of the Dunedain, though they also do operate down in Ithilien, which is down around Gondor, down by the border of Mordor. We do know, however, that Aragorn grew up almost exclusively in the region of Eriador because he grew up in the house of Elrond. And Elrond, as I'm sure many of you know, has resided in Rivendell for, well, a very, very long time. And Aragorn was practically raised by Elrond and regards him as a father figure in his life. He spent a huge amount of time in Rivendell. This means that his father, Arathorn, was also living in Eriador, primarily, as basically all of his ancestors were. It's pretty easy to trace the location of the heirs of Elendil from Elendil himself all the way down to Aragorn, because most of them were kings of the Kingdom of Arnor, which is, as I said before, where Eriador is now. The kingdom fell apart, largely because of the attacks by the Witch King of Angmar, who is arguably the real villain of the Third Age, more so than Sauron, but, I mean, that's a whole rabbit trail and a half, so I'm gonna try my best to kind of keep away from that. So let's take a look at this new version of Aragorn that we've been presented with here. So I think it's safe to say, looking at him, that he's got more than a little bit of Haradrim blood in him, since he doesn't even look vaguely Arnorian. He looks entirely Haradrim. So this means that most likely he is first generation. Okay, so to be clear, that doesn't entirely rule out the possibility that this could happen. Perhaps his mother is from Harad. Perhaps somewhere along the line, there was some lady who, for some reason, journeyed all the way from near Harad, around the borders of Mordor, and up past Gondor into what is now Rohan, and then through the gap of Rohan, or over the Misty Mountains, for some undisclosed reason, and wound up in Eriador, and then Arathorn saw her and decided that was some pretty hot stuff, and did the hanky-panky with her, and Aragorn popped out. I mean, it's possible that that happened. Except that was just one small problem and issue with that entire thing, and that's that Arathorn was married. Arathorn married a woman named Gilraen, who was the daughter of the chief of the Dunedain. So, you know, another fair-skinned individual. So, there are a few possibilities here to explain this new version of Aragorn. Either Arathorn was cheating on his wife with some lady from Harad, and her child was what he considered to be his legitimate heir for some reason, or a Haradrim man had come all the way from Harad and past Gondor and Mordor and through Rohan and the Misty Mountains and all the way to Eriador, and had fucked Gilraen at some point, and she gave birth to his kid, and Arathorn was either so incredibly stupid or so incredibly embarrassed by it that he just adopted the son that resulted. Either way, this kid is not what anyone would really consider to be the legitimate heir to the throne of Gondor, particularly in the second case, where he's not even actually Arathorn's kid at all. Either way, he does have some Dunedain blood in him, which would explain how he manages to get as old as he does without visibly aging, but it does mean that it calls his royal lineage into question very, very, very strongly. This is the issue with trying to just casually change something in the Lord of the Rings setting, because Tolkien went into excruciating detail about each person and their lineages, and when you try to mix things up for the sake of posturing and portraying things the way they are here in our modern world, what you end up with is more questions than answers in a very, very, very big mess. This is what causes me the most concern. Understand, I have spent a lot of time in Lord of the Rings. I'm very passionate about Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings intensely. So when I see something like this, I am left scratching my head very, very hard. And also understand that Lord of the Rings, especially with the books, doesn't really have what you'd call casual fans. This is a book series that's been out for a very long time, and it's written in a very long-winded way. Getting through these books and fully appreciating what they have to offer kind of requires you to be invested in the world that Tolkien wrote, because the manner in which he has written these books, they're constantly making references to the deeper lore and history of Middle-earth. And if that stuff doesn't interest you, you're going to be very, very, very bored while reading these books. And I could understand that maybe people are more interested in the movies than they are the books, and maybe that's the target audience for these cards, but even then, people are going to associate Aragorn with a very, very stellar performance by Viggo Mortensen, and they really are not going to be associating him with whatever the fuck this is supposed to be. It's clearly a decision made not to appeal to Lord of the Rings fans, but rather to people who have certain ideologies in mind from the word go. And that's fairly clear just from the way that it's being handled. This decision doesn't work for the lore nerds because it just takes the lore and breaks it over its knee like it doesn't even matter. And it's not a great decision for people who like the movies either, because you've gone so drastically off the deep end that no one who takes a look at this card without the accompanying text up above is going to be able to identify that that is Aragorn. And we won't even get into what they did to Anduril. What the fuck is that supposed to be? That is... Yeah, I could rant for a hot minute about what they did to Anduril in that card. But that's all besides the point. No one is going to see this and say, oh yes, this is Aragorn. They're going to see this and say, oh look, it's a generic Magic the Gathering card. I could be wrong in this, but I assumed that the entire point of this crossover was to bring some Lord of the Rings fans into Magic the Gathering and have them kind of join in and increase your profit margins that way by appealing to a wider audience. And if that was the goal, I can firmly say you done fucked it up. Because again, if you took all the text off of this card and just showed me a picture of it, there is nothing on this that says Lord of the Rings to me. There's certainly nothing on it that says King of Gondor to me. There's nothing here that is even closely related to anything that Tolkien wrote. I mean, Arwen looks okay. That's about what Arwen should look like. Why does Arwen get a lore-accurate depiction, but Aragorn doesn't? Why does the appearance accuracy matter when they're doing the elf chick, but not the half-elven amazing hero King of Gondor who married her? I guess that just doesn't matter. So this kind of brings me to my last bit of this rant that I've decided to go on, for better or worse. What is the purpose behind this? What's the real purpose? It can't be to try and appeal to Tolkien fans, because, like I've said, there's nothing here that appeals to Tolkien fans. So, what is the actual goal here? And it's difficult to attribute motive to a faceless corporation, but if I had to take a stab at it, I would say this is another attempt to appeal to quote-unquote modern audiences. There's this sort of hallucinatory notion that there's this illusory group of people out there who think that this is the most important thing and will only buy your product if it has this in it. And that it's such a huge group of people that sacrificing your existing customer base is totally worth it to appeal to this demographic out there somewhere. And honestly, this is a song and dance routine that we have seen many, many times before. If the ongoing shit show with the live-action remake of The Little Mermaid is anything to go off of at all. There is no reason whatsoever to do this unless you are trying to appeal to a very specific type of audience who doesn't care about Lord of the Rings lore, they don't care about Lord of the Rings in general, and if they do care about it, they have a modern socio-political agenda that they care about far, far more than they care about Lord of the Rings or any sort of internal consistency within its narrative. And honest to God, it is the most exhausting and tiring thing that I have ever seen. And I'm not going to dive into it. Some people will go hardcore into this and saying, "Oh, we're being replaced. We're being written out of our own fiction and being replaced." I don't think that it's really as much that as it is just trying to appeal to a new audience that they are convinced is emerging that has never actually appeared. And really, I think the whole thing stems from, I know I said I wasn't going to get into racism, but I do think that this particular angle is got some racist overtones to it. Middle-earth has dark-skinned people in it. You couldn't write a story about one of them. You couldn't make a character out of one of them, make a card about one of them. Draw attention to one of the lesser-known areas of Middle-earth that doesn't get as much spotlight or attention. Couldn't do that. You had to go and put them into the white story because that's the only one that actually matters. That's a little suspicious. Or, I mean, look at Little Mermaid as an excellent analog. You couldn't write your own film based off of maybe an African fairy tale or legend. You couldn't do that. You had to put them into a Danish one because the Danish one is the one that actually is worth adapting. It's a bit racist if you ask me, but I'll admit I'm not a super huge expert on how the rules on this stuff work. That's just how my conscience sits with it. And honestly, this kind of feels the same way here. You do this sort of thing, and I read it as that you don't think black people deserve to have their own characters or story, and that you feel that they need to piggyback off of the recognition and success of white people in order to have any success, which is all kinds of fucked up. I do think that it stems from that as well, but mostly I think this is just an attempt to appeal to modern sensibilities. I think it's part of the internet age. We've got this sort of ability to blow things out of proportion, make them look bigger than they actually are. You go down the street and you talk to a random person about what they think about the new casting choice in Little Mermaid, and they're probably going to tell you that it's dumb as fuck. You go online and you're going to get a massive debate of people from around the country and around the world chiming in with different opinions. It leads to this sort of distorted lens where you think that there's more of these people out there than there actually are. I think that sort of thing is kind of what's driving it. I mean, obviously there's hiring really shitty writers and people who convince higher-ups that they need to have these sorts of things injected in order for things to work right. I believe it was Ethan Van Sciver who talked about, I think he used the term strange women when referring to comic books with this sort of thing, talking about taking patriarchal elements out of comics. I think a similar thing is definitely happening in fiction and tabletop gaming as well. So, I mean, Wizards of the Coast has been pulling this before. They got rid of half races in D&D. I think they're getting rid of, like, the idea of races altogether and, like, special racial abilities. It's all about just making everybody the same. There's been a big push to end quote-unquote racism in Dungeons & Dragons, which is made by Wizards of the Coast, same people who make Magic the Gathering. It's pretty clear that there's an agenda behind all of this stuff. It's not done just because they thought it was a neat idea and wanted a new unique take on Aragorn here. It's done because they want to send a message out to people. You know, never mind appealing to the people who actually care about Lord of the Rings and this crossover, which is supposed to be bringing them in so that you make more money. Never mind actually doing that. We're going to instead alienate them by taking the lore and snapping it in half. There's no other explanation than that there's an agenda here. And to be frank, it's an agenda that I'm sick and tired of. It's been infecting so many different places. We've seen it in Warhammer 40k. We've seen it in BattleTech, where they're removing things that they deem to be offensive for no other reason than just that's what they think. And it doesn't matter what the fans actually think. It doesn't matter, you know, for the people who invest their time and money into making it a success because they're very passionate about the hobby that they have. None of that stuff matters. All that matters is the agenda and pushing it as hard as they can. And it's a real shame in Magic the Gathering's case, because, you know, I'm not particularly huge into trading card games. I've tried a couple times to get into Magic the Gathering, and it's never really grabbed me. But a Lord of the Rings tie-in, with how much I love Lord of the Rings, was the perfect opportunity to grab me and my wallet and drag me kicking and screaming into this very expensive hobby, as if I don't already have enough of those. They could have easily convinced me that this was a good way to spend my time and money, and instead, here we are, and I'm ranting for over a half an hour about how stupid their decision-making process is, and why this decision doesn't work at all for either lore or commercial reasons. And so it's just utterly mind-boggling to me that this is still going on, even now. I will be incredibly interested to know how well these Lord of the Rings sets sell. I'd be willing to wager that they'll sell decently well, because a lot of my friends are Magic the Gathering players, and they will buy anything new that comes out from Wizards of the Coast. Any new Magic the Gathering thing, they've got to have it, and they will add it to their collection. They will spend a couple weeks worth of paychecks to do it if they can. So I fully expect that this is going to sell pretty well. But I highly doubt that it's going to bring in a lot of new fans to Magic the Gathering. I very much doubt that. And I mean, that's the whole point of doing one of these crossovers, is to bring in new people who wouldn't normally look at it. And I don't see that happening. I might keep an eye on it. I might not. We'll see how that goes. But I do plan on talking more about Lord of the Rings itself. Now that I've kind of got this bullshit off of my chest, I would like to talk about the things about Lord of the Rings that I really like, and maybe give some summaries of the different characters of Middle-earth, because I think that the extended universe of Lord of the Rings is one of the greatest creations anyone's ever made, and I'm very passionate about it. But I couldn't really go into and start doing that without first laying out some things that really frustrate me about where things are going at the moment. And again, it's awfully convenient that this happened so soon after Christopher Tolkien's death, because he would never have allowed this affront to the world that his father wrote to have ever gone down. He was notoriously very, very strict on the rules that people had to follow when doing any sort of adaptation or licensed production based on the Lord of the Rings. And it's part of the reason why Lord of the Rings games not based on the movies tend to kinda suck ass. Not gonna lie. But he was very good at protecting the legacy of Tolkien and the books themselves. Not to mention adding a great deal of it himself based on what he remembered of his father, the notes that he had, and where he remembered things were going. The man was incredible, and he did such a great job of helping to bring this universe to life for so many of us, and now that he's gone and out of the picture, it's immediately starting to fall apart. We very much feel the loss of Christopher Tolkien, those of us who are Lord of the Rings fans. And I couldn't really bring myself to go in and talk about how much I love Lord of the Rings without first being like, yo, shit's fucked. So, once again, I've rambled and raved, and honestly, again, like I said before, these are not my favorite types of videos to make, and I don't really expect it to perform well, algorithmically speaking, because, well, frankly, you know what, I don't even care about the algorithm, really. I just like to make things as they come into my head, and sometimes people like it, and sometimes they care, and sometimes they don't, but at the end of the day, I'm trying to make stuff that I want to have out there. And this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while. I appreciate those of you who stuck with me for this long and have the patience to sit through my ramblings, coherent or otherwise. And if this has been bothering you as much as it's been bothering me, please let me know down in the comments. And if you'd like to see more Lord of the Rings content from me, let me know, because I would very much love to do some of that. But that's about all that I really have to say for today. So thank you all once again for putting up with me, and until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.